This video is to give you some tips about question 33 about the factors that affect rusting. In order to explain the rusting process or to explain the factors that affect rusting, you need to actually give in full detail what happens during rusting. And you need to show a diagram something like this, that it shows that you need to have steel, which is the species that's going to be oxidized. You need to have oxygen gas, which is the species that's going to be reduced. And you need to show you need to have some sort of water or aqueous layer there to act as an electrolyte, because rusting is a galvanic process and therefore requires cathode sites, anode sites, as well as an electrolyte. And what you need to do is detail the basic steps that occur in rusting. You need to say that there are some sites that act as cathodes, particularly where the oxygen concentration is high, where a reduction process takes place, and you need to detail that reduction process. You also need to detail there are certain sites on the steel which are more likely to act as anode sites, and you'll see where I've put that number 2 here. That number 2 represents where the anode site's going to be. It's actually in the middle of the drop. You should be explaining why. You need to say what oxidation process occurs at these anodic sites. You need to note there's got to be electron transfer. Okay, you can't have a galvanic reaction without electron transfer, and obviously electrons travel from anodes to cathodes. That's the third thing you need to talk about. And once you describe those three processes, you describe the reduction, you've described the oxidation, you described electron transfer, you know that in a galvanic cell you also need ion transport, and that's what the aqueous layer is for. And as we know from our studies, that cations go to the cathode and anions go to the anode, and in this particular process, when those ions actually meet, you get a precipitation reaction. You need to detail what precipitation reaction actually takes place when those ions meet, and that precipitate then gets oxidized to make rust. And that rust settles on the surface of the steel. But note, the actual place where the rust settles in this particular example is not the place where the iron's being oxidized. The iron's actually being oxidized in the center of the drop. The oxygen's being reduced at the edge of the drop, but the rust's actually forming somewhere in the middle. So there's actually 6 stages to rusting that you need to talk about, and then based on the chemistry of these 6 stages, you need to go and explain the factors that could possibly affect the rate of rusting. And the factors listed here, obviously we all know how temperature affects rates of reaction, so that's pretty straightforward. You need to detail how the salt concentration might affect the rate of reaction, how stress or damage to the steel might affect rates of reaction, how pH might affect rates of reaction. There's actually 2 ways in which pH can affect rates of corrosion of steel. You need to talk about how the percentage of carbon or alloying can affect the rate of rusting. This one's a bit tricky. It's the idea of differential aeration, how different oxygen concentrations can actually speed up and slow down rusting, particularly where you've got some part of the steel with a high oxygen concentration and some parts of the steel with a low oxygen concentration. And finally, galvanic contact. How can contact with other metals either increase or decrease the rate of rusting? And that is basically the outline of your question 33.